Hi, everybody. This is Zeb Wellborn with the Chino Valley Chamber of Commerce. Today, I'm here with Patrick Ellis from the Murrieta Wildomar Chamber of Commerce, and I'm talking about ways to increase revenue through the chamber work that we do. Patrick has created and put together a phenomenal program, and so I wanted to highlight that and talk about the work that he's doing. So Patrick, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Zeb.
Cool. So let's talk about the program. It was in the WACE kind of insider guide, and you had a little highlight of the work that you did this year. It sounds phenomenal. So would you care to share what you had put together?
Sure, glad to. So one of the things that we were able to do by leveraging our foundation, our 501c3, is we were able to work with the city of Murrieta. They have the Murrieta Innovation Center, which is basically their old city hall building, and they dedicated it to be a life sciences and health tech incubator. And so with that, we were able to help them to come in and manage it, help them put a professional spin on the building for them, because as we all know, cities are not great at managing things. Just kidding. No, but what we were able to do is during COVID, an area like ours typically would not be able to qualify for a federal EDA grant. But because during COVID, one of the things that happened and we paid attention and took a full advantage of it was the EDA requirements for their grants, they threw them out the window. And they said, basically at that point, every community in the country was considered a distressed community and needed assistance. And so everyone basically was eligible. So we took that as a huge opportunity for us, and we applied for this grant. And what the grant is for is to update our innovation center, the old city hall building, with the primary focus of building out a wet lab. Wet lab is a room that basically has all of the equipment and the benches that are needed for life science companies, health tech companies to do their work, their studies, their research, that type of thing. If you've seen CSI, it's that room where they're doing all the kind of studies on, with microscopes and trying to, grow their little cultures and things of that sort. That's what a wet lab is. And so we took that as a huge opportunity, submitted that because we would be the only the second wet lab in all of Riverside County to to be functioning and useful for those who need it. So we really took advantage of that. We put as I said, did it as a co-application with the city of Murrieta, because we know that federal EDA as well as state love to see P3 applications, which is the public-private partnerships. And so we did that, went through it took the entire time of COVID to go through it. It took about a 2-year period. But it was last April was when we were finally awarded the grant. And so we're now in the process of going through that, which is still going to be quite a bit of time, because we are now moving at the speed of government.
Right on. Yeah. And I feel like I want to ask a lot of dumb questions. So excuse me.
Away.
But you got started. So it sounds like before this grant was approached, you had run an innovation center, right? Is that the name for it?
Yep.
And so that's something that you as a chamber were facilitating in advance, which kind of helped guide you in this direction. So talk a little bit about the innovation center, your involvement with that, and how that is incorporated with your chamber.
Sure. So we had started talking to the city about probably at this point about 4 or 5 years ago about this potential of coming in and managing the innovation center for them. We had our own office a couple miles from here, and what we basically said was, you've got this innovation center. It's got a couple successful companies in there that are starting to grow, but you're challenged with the management of the day-to-day. You have no one who sits in the building and can welcome people in. There were challenges with transients who would come into the building every now and then. And so what we did was we put together a proposal with them, and we actually technically did it through our nonprofit. And we did that with the focus that if it was the chamber that was the entity that was agreeing to the management agreement with the city. What it would do is say, okay, it's just chamber, it's our 501c6, but we were looking longer term in a bigger picture. The reason we did it with our foundation, our 501c3, which is called Impact Riverside County, is that gave us an ability to come in and manage it under that. And then we have just a management agreement between our foundation and the chamber to be able to be the backing for it. But doing it under that 501c3 opens up opportunities for us to go out and look at grant opportunities, to solicit other types of sponsorship and support for the Innovation Center itself, for the companies that are starting up here in the Innovation Center, because there's, as we all know in this industry, 501c, the basket of money that's there for 501c6s is like this big, and the basket of money for 501c3s is the size of Rhode Island. So it's a little outweighed there. So that was why we strategically did it under our 501c3, our foundation.
Okay, so the city already had kind of like an innovation center, and
Yep.
you approached them about taking it over. And how did that come about? Because I imagine it wasn't just like, okay, yeah, sure, sounds great, here you go.
Yeah,
There are a lot of
no,
back and forth on that.
It took about 2.5 years to kind of work through that process, because you've got, first you have the city staff part of it. You've got to get through that, right? You get the right people on board there. And then you have to get it past your council as well, right? And the way we structured it was, we started it off as a 5-year agreement. We would come in and manage the center for them, and we did ask for money, but we didn't ask for what it costs us to run it, right? We asked for $30,000 a year for 5 years. Realistically, it'll cost us at least double that. Yeah. But the intention is we're not doing this as a profit center. We're doing this as an opportunity for us to come in and build something special that's mission driven for what we do anyways. Yeah. And so what we were looking for was the dollar amount was just to help offset some basic hard costs. We knew that we would ultimately be able to regain that other revenue that would be needed to offset this by ultimately getting to this being either our main office or leveraging it for other dollars through membership and sponsorship and stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and we've been able to do that. And we realized that just 2 years into our agreement, and as we were entering into this grant, that we wanted a little bit more security in that. So we went back to the city and discussed with them about extending it to a 10-year agreement, leaving the dollar amount the same. One of the things that I didn't mention in the grant is it's a $3 million grant, but as with most federal and state grants, well, mostly federal, it's an 80-20 split. So technically, out of that 3 million, we're really only getting 2.4. That the rest of it is on us to come up with that. So we have to come up with 20% of it, and they cover 80% of it. And I agreed with, and I went into an agreement with the city is that the city would cover 10% of that, and we'll cover 10% of that. Cool. And so then I'm still on the hook for going out and raising another 300,000 for it, which is fine because I'm about to secure that. But those are the pieces. And so with that 10-year agreement, though, what we were also able to do is then say okay, what we're going to do is move the chamber offices fully into the Innovation Center as well. And that was a twofold thing. One is it helps us offset what was our normal rent on an annual basis. So we, were able to kind of take that off of our plate when it came to budget reasons, which obviously is a huge win for us. Yeah. But it also gave us that ability to really empower everything that we're doing here now. And everyone saw that as a no-brainer. Yeah. Yeah. And then, so the community like ours, we don't have the Innovation Center, that was originally a city plan thing. Was that the businesses in community? That's something that we don't have here, but sounds like it would be a great thing to include. Can you give me some support or guidance about
how that originally came about and who were the stakeholders that helped make that happen originally?
Yeah. So it started off, I mean, obviously it was a city vision, right? The city had the vision for this. And they get the credit for that. They saw that about 12, 13 years ago that Murrieta, specifically within the valley that we're in, was going to become kind of a healthcare hub for our region.
Right.
And having seen that, they saw that, okay, the vision for that is we're going to support that. We're going to go out and attract more of that. But what we need to do is figure out how do we support that from the standpoint of growing our own, right? Yeah. And I think that might be the ultimate idea of what your question is right, is how do I as a community look at what we have and figure out how do I find that hidden gem, right? And what it is it's looking within your area. What is that thing that's a little unique to you, right? What is that one thing that sets you apart from some of your neighboring communities, or from, or from the larger city that's, 20, 30, 40 miles away from you? You find that little thing and you figure out is, okay, this is something that we might be able to foster, right? It fits within our mission as an organization. We want to grow companies, we want to grow jobs. What is that one piece? And then figure out is, okay, let's put our arms around this, and how do we figure out a way to grow this little by little? It takes a while. I mean, this has taken nearly 15 years to get to this point. The last 11 years, that I've been involved with in trying to figure out how do we get to this point. It takes time, but you just have to you got to look at your own community and evaluate it and say, okay, what is that interesting little niche that we have, and how is that something that we can identify that fits our mission and can help us to grow something special that becomes unique to us?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm so curious to know, like, the stakeholders in particular, because just in my experience dealing with cities, you have the city council, you have the staff, you have the citizens or the residents that make up the community. Who are kind of like the main people that helped push that along in the first place?
For you mean for the innovation center itself?
Yeah.
It was a couple of our city council members. They saw the vision on it. So Rick Gibbs was one of our original city council members that saw that. It was our original economic development director at the time, who helped push that vision too. And there was a lot of questions in the beginning. There were a lot of people in the community. There were a lot of businesses who are like, why are you doing this? Why don't you just make it why don't you just make it an open, workspace for everybody? Why don't you just let anybody go in there who wants to start a business? And the challenge there, though, is sometimes when you just, as you know, and as we when I'm sure as you guys are the same, when you teach and you work and you coach businesses, you have to find out your unique, values set. And what is that bit, right? And you can't be everything to everyone. So you've got to figure out what is that one special piece that you have that's a little bit different that you can then foster to really grow.
Awesome. Okay, and then the $3 million that you got, so that was for a wet lab specifically, and it makes a lot of sense now that the innovation center was specifically focused around the medical industry, right?
Right.
So why the wet lab, and how did you decide? Like, first off, how did it come up as a grant opportunity for you? How did the decision process come about where you're like, this is one we want to go for? And then can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So one thing that I have done throughout my entire career in the chamber world has been very focused and done a lot of work specifically in economic development. And so I work with our economic development director for the city of Murrieta specifically, but actually for all of the ones in our entire region, work with them pretty closely. Having that involvement, it ties you into certain pieces, right? And so usually federal EDA grants are things that most cities, municipalities, counties are the ones that find out about have the bandwidth to kind of go after and in that sense. And so what we were able to do was, for the last 10 years, was attend different events with the West Coast representatives for the EDA. Will Marshall being the one who represents the West Coast. There's probably a lot of chamber people up and down the West Coast who know who Will Marshall is and have met with him and talked with him. But it's so getting involved in those different pieces, right? Not that you are going to be the ones that do it or the ones that change it, but you got to be, as we like to, say is, in you got to be at the table, because if you're not at the table, you'll end up on the menu, right? We don't ever want to end up on the menu. We want to be at the table. So you got to be in these different rooms. So I encourage everyone to, try and just push yourself into these rooms and be at the table. Just soak it all in, learn as much as possible when it comes to economic development, because that's going to open up those opportunities. Because we kept going to different things that Will Marshall has, because we kept on, their distribution list, and we looked at and identified opportunities. And we always ask, we're like, hey, we see this grant opportunity, can we apply? And, we'd call Will and he'd be like, no, we're not giving you that money. You're the Beverly Hills of the Inland Empire. You're not getting our dollars. And so, we kept going and kept going. And then when all of that changed, it was Will Marshall who reached out to Scott Agajanian, who was our economic development director, and said, hey, you guys have an opportunity now. And so you've got to always be ready, right? Because you never know when that opportunity is going to arise.
Yeah, and then he specifically identified that wet lab for your innovation center.
Yes.
So this is something you should pursue, and then you guys went after it.
We had talked about that. We knew that was something that we wanted. We had seen that in certain areas. We had visited wet labs all over Southern California. We'd been out to University Lab Partners in Irvine and Hatch Spaces. But we knew that was the one piece that we were missing to really help the types of startups that we're trying to foster here. So we've got, in the Innovation Center, we have 6 startups that are right here physically in the Innovation Center, and then we have 6 that are virtual tenants. The one piece that they all needed was access to a wet lab, and well, all of them but one. And so what they were doing was they ended up doing some of their work here, but then they'd have to go and drive up to UC Riverside, or they'd have to drive down to San Diego to access one of the wet labs. And to access those wet labs is not cheap. And so this gives us an opportunity now, with the city's help, to bring in the resources to build out a wet lab, have those here. And now all of a sudden, the companies that are here don't have to split their time, right? So they're spending an hour driving to UCR or down to San Diego. Now they can do everything right here. And in the vision for the city and for us as well, as how much of the onus can we take off of these startup companies who have brilliant ideas, to get them to market that much quicker, so that then they can spin out of here, rent out a 50,000 square foot building here in Murrieta, hire, 50 to 100 people, and create all these great opportunities for our valley, and then open up a next opportunity for the next startup to come in.
Yeah, and we've been exploring a lot of grant opportunities ourselves, and I feel like we're very new to this realm. But when you're doing that public-private partnership and you guys decided to pursue this, like, who was the main driver of that? Was it you? Was it the chamber in general? Was it your board? Was it the city? Who was kind of facilitating this?
Primarily it came down to me and Scott. So me as the chamber and our foundation, Scott is the economic development director for the city. It was the two of us that are constantly working on these different opportunities. So when the opportunity arose, it had actually, technically, the way it worked is the city applied first for the funds. They did not get approved. They came back to us and said, we like the project. We want to see about trying to fund this project, but we want to see this as a public-private partnership. So we had to redo the application as a co-application between the city and us, because that's the way they want to see it nowadays. The public-private partnerships is it's the roadmap for those who are looking to get funding for projects. So those, chambers that are out there that have a foundation, work with your cities, get involved with your economic development directors on a regular basis. I mean, I couldn't do half of what I do without having the relationships with the economic development directors. But I can also say is they couldn't do half of what they do without the power of the chamber and what we bring to the table.
Yeah.
It's a really, really good partnership.
Cool. And then, so through the process, you're putting this grant piece together, you're collaborating with these different stakeholders. Like, how do you identify? So, like the wet lab thing that you guys chose, we come across now that we've like in this world and like are paying attention to that kind of stuff. We come across these grant opportunities all the time. It's very uncertain of whether or not these ones are ones that we should be applying to, ones that we should. How much resources you can dedicate to it? Do you have any guidance on like, this is the thing that we should be focusing on, and that's why we're going in this direction? Or do you apply for everything and just kind of hope something hits?
No, that's a really tricky thing. We end up we build the relationships first. So we build the relationships, whether it was with Will Marshall and the EDA, whether it's with the governor's GoBiz office, whether it's with our local county workforce development boards or our local, or just our counties in general. The relationships are what get you there, because what happens is once you have those relationships and those different people in those seats that are going to be issuing these opportunities, and they know who you are, they'll reach out to you. Because that's, one situation we're in now. We're probably gonna be going for a new grant with the city as well, because we had somebody reach out to us and say, hey, this grant's going to be coming out. This will work perfect for what you're doing. Be ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
But that only came because we fostered that relationship with the individual and that office on a regular basis. And it's not a one and done. It's a constant thing. And it's, like any of these offices, right? You have turnover, you have different people who come in and out. The second somebody turns over, you get the new person in and you bring them down and you meet with them and you tour with them and you start the process over again. But, I think as a lot of us in the chamber world likes to say to our members is that a lot of business is built on relationships. It's, you do business with people like, and trust. This is no different. It's all about building relationships. It's having those connections with the right people in the right offices, so that you're ready when they're ready, and you're just constantly having discussions around it.
All right. So, you mentioned a couple of those folks, like economic development partners, and do you have a short list of folks that you're like, as a chamber of commerce, these are really the people or the organizations or the institutions that we should be connected with?
Yeah, definitely your economic development directors. If you're not working with them on a weekly or daily basis, it's a huge miss. And I understand, there's some communities that the economic development director doesn't want anything to do with the local chamber or whatever, and that's fine. But you got to figure out ways to kind of get in there, get through that, kind of figure out how to foster that relationship. And a lot of it sometimes is when I first started at this chamber, the relationship between the chamber and the city was atrocious. And so I had to do a lot of work in those first couple of years to build up goodwill between us and the city. And so basically anytime the economic development director wanted help with something or needed help with something, the answer was always yes, no matter what, right? Didn't care. I'm not going to ask for money. I'm not going to ask for anything, right? I got to build up that goodwill. I got to build up to the point where I become so valuable to them, they need me now. So that's a good approach to it. So your economic development director is key, a key relationship. Your workforce development board, right? Whether it's the staff, whether it's the board itself, workforce development is one of those areas that unfortunately we as chambers have not been as engaged with as as should have been, for the last 20 years. And as Zeb, you and I have talked about this in the past. workforce development is something that we should literally, every workforce development board in this country should have at least one chamber CEO on that board. In my opinion, hands down. There's no better entity that needs to be sitting on a board for a workforce development board than a chamber. And so that is critical for everyone. And then whoever you're kind of, if you have a good, strong county, you know, getting in with your county economic development, or whoever kind of is in charge of, you know, the attraction approach for the county, that can be another huge asset for any chamber CEO.
Yeah, and then like on the big picture scale, you've secured this grant. You know it's great for the community. You know it's great for those businesses that are there. But one of the things that I feel like I don't know, gets lost, but it's like, how do you tell the story that this is going to be great for our community? How do you get people on board to want to see this come through? Because I know that, and there's a lot of things where it's like, yeah, it sounds nice, you know, but it's going to cost X number, you know, like how do you get people on board so that everybody and your stakeholders is excited to do this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's for us, it's all about jobs, but not just jobs, but good jobs, right? We're a city that has been since its inception, for the most part, been a commuters. We're, you know, a bedroom community. Most people in this city, when I first started here, 66% of all working adults in Murrieta were traveling about an hour or more every single morning and every single evening just to go to work. That is an absolutely astounding number that are traveling that far just for work. We identified that a lot of these people work in the life sciences or health tech industry because they're going to San Diego or they're going to Orange County.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another way for us to turn that narrative and look at that focus and say, we need to figure out how do we get some of this brain trust to stay home.
Yeah.
And so what we did is looked at it, and we invest in the opportunities to give these individuals an opportunity to start something on their own, but then for it to stay here. Our goal has always been is to reverse the commute. We don't want 66% leaving. We'd rather 33% leaving and 66% staying here for work. But we want to focus in on good jobs.
Yeah, and I think we have a similar community in that realm, right? A lot of our folks do the same thing. But do you have a lot of folks? I think one of the values that our community has, or that there's, is that because you're that far away, it's more of a small city vibe, you know, and so there's a contingent of folks that I know that are very adamant about wanting to keep that economic development component that aren't as enthusiastic about that as a chamber folks might be. So is that something you've had to overcome in your community, and can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, that definitely is, and especially with like our neighboring city Wildomar, which we had merged with that chamber 4, 5, or 6 years ago. That is one of those big issues, right? The small town, they want to keep their rural feel and everything. That's fine, but you also then explain to everyone, if you want that, that's okay, but just realize that with that decision, there are certain things you will never have. If you want Trader Joe's, you can't have that mentality. If you want nice restaurants, you can't have that mentality. The only way you get to the amenities that you really want as a community is having good daytime traffic numbers. Every site selector, every developer, every retailer is going to look at what are your daytime traffic numbers. If your daytime traffic numbers are good, they're going to consider your community. So if you want these things, these are things you have to do to get them. But if you are fine with not having those, then that's fine. But just realize there's a give and take with every decision. So we would go through that process and say, is because, you know, we listen to the residents all the time when we would go to the ICSC show every year to kind of attract retailers and developers. And everyone would always say at the first thing everyone wanted was a Trader Joe's. like, we'll go and talk to them, but until our daytime traffic numbers hit a certain thing, and until they decide that this is the type of, area that they want to be in, we don't have a chance. And
Yeah.
so it's being very open and honest with the public in that regard as well.
So in that specific example, is that something that you are curating? So you're like the daytime traffic numbers or whatever it is. So that's something that like using that information to tell your story. So like, are you the one that's putting that together? Is that the economic development folks? How is that kind of story being told?
Economic development folks have those numbers. They all have access to them, whether it's through contracts that they have with different research firms or what have you. They all have access to that. They all know what their daytime traffic numbers are and everything. And most are willing to share it, or they probably publish it on certain reports on their own website that you can just pull the information from.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, all those things they're pretty fairly basic economic development essentials.
Right.
And yeah, those are the things that you need to know. But it's being able to then take that and be able to share that with the community as well, and get them to understand is there's a give and take to every community as it builds out, and everyone goes through those growing pains at some point. You're always going to have the NIMBYs, you're always going to have the no growthers, and it's just a matter of is that the majority or is that the minority, and they're just the most vocal, and balancing that and being able, and there's no one better that knows that and knows how to really rebut that to an extent than Chris Romer.
No, that's good to know. Good to know. I'll definitely ask you about that. And then, so let's go back to the last. This is probably the last question. Maybe we have so the $3 million you secured. I know you talked about the vision is you get these businesses that are starting out that can use that space. They can speed up the time of improvement, and then they build these big businesses in your community. What does the future look like with the funding that you receive? How are you allocating it? How does a chamber I'm always interested in like how do chambers produce revenue so you can bring on more staff members in order to execute on the things that we want to do. So how does a chamber oversee those funds, and then how do you implement it, and what does the future look like for your community?
So one of the things that I have always done is I always look at every revenue source kind of individually, and that it does not determine exactly what we do staff wise. So staff wise, I look at staff wise as our everyday chamber staff, right? Like our membership, new and renewals, our member events, things of that sort. That's my staffing. When we're talking about grants, when we're talking about non-dues revenue that are either through our foundation or through our destination marketing organization, those are separate, and there may be some staff time that's needed and allocated there, but I have seen in the past organizations that count on those types of funds for everyday revenue expenses, and that catch up and bite them in the ass. And I've always been very, 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 very cautious about that. So whenever we get a grant, whenever we get an opportunity for funds that are outside of the chamber, that are different than our chamber focused events and programs, I'm very wary. I kind of look at it from the standpoint similar to the way we have. So the way we build it out is the chamber and our nonprofit have a management agreement, and the chamber manages the nonprofit. Within that agreement, the chamber gets anywhere from 10 to 15% of the revenue that's generated from our foundation. And a lot of that is to find out. A lot of grants, federal grants, state grants, like you have a cap of 10% for admin, right? So that admin doesn't mean it's all going to staffing. Admin means that's your overall amount that's coming back to the organization to support that program. So I've always been extremely cautious on looking at any one of those as an opportunity to hire staff. I think that can be a very slippery slope to run down. I have always, and as you know, because we've talked about this in the past, we've always run thin on staff. And a lot of that has to do with because we hire and we groom people who are extremely passionate about what we do. And so that makes a big difference. But I'm very, very cautious on looking at those grants and those non-dues revenues that are outside the chamber as opportunities for hiring staff. But it does open up opportunities, though, for the chamber staff to do things within it that are mission driven, that help end up driving funds back to the chamber through their own programming, through membership, through other things. I hope that kind of makes sense. I didn't go too far off on a tangent there.
No, it does, and that's super helpful because when you're looking at those opportunities, that's like I mean, in my purview is there's lots of stuff that I know that we can do, have the ability to do, but you need the revenue to do it, and you have to get it from somewhere. And so the intention is to get it from every spot that you can, and so that's why I'm very curious about how do we work on generating revenue in its entirety. For the work that we do as chambers, because I know that in order for us to make the most impact as possible, I know that like I mean you know this, that it was me and 2 other people when I first started, and there's only so much you can do in your community when you don't have the full resources that we've developed over the last few years, and I know you've done the same thing. How about so that $3 million, you're using it in your community. To talk a little bit about the future, how that's going to be implemented, and
so as I joked earlier about we can go only as fast as the speed of government. So we were awarded the grant in April. It took from April until the end of October to just do the work that needed to be done to put out an RFP for design work on the building. So we got that out, and then that was open, and we just closed all that out at the end of December. Finally selected the design firm the week before last, and now we're just waiting to get all of that stuff approved by federal EDA so we can have our first meeting with the design firm. So it's a process. It's definitely a process.
Yeah, and then one thing I'm learning too, so the funding that comes in, you were awarded it in April. Did that come in for you right away? Is it there yet?
No. So the way a federal EDA grant works is it's on a reimbursement basis. So technically we have to pay for everything first, submit it to the federal EDA. They have to approve it. Once they've approved it, they send a check back for 80% of whatever that was.
Cool. It sounds like fun.
Oh yes, it's a blast.
For sure. Well, Patrick, I'm excited to share this. So I think I'm not sure if I mentioned this at the beginning or not, but I am giving a presentation on this revenue generation talk at WACE. So I definitely want to tell your story in my section there. So thank you for sharing that with me. And on a side note, when I joined this chamber industry 4 years ago, Patrick and I joined the Inland Empire Chamber Alliance, and that's where you and I first, or at least where I felt like you and I first got a chance to connect. And I just admired how involved you were in the legislative process and like your knowledge around all of that stuff. And that was something that I am still trying to develop. So I asked you to be a mentor of mine, and you've graciously agreed to do that. So thank you for your guidance and support on that stuff too.
Of course, my pleasure.
And looking forward to, I understand you're also doing a TED talk at the conference in February.
I am.
So I'll be looking forward to that one too.
It'll be interesting to say the least.
Cool, cool. Well, I'll mark it on my calendars and make sure I'm there. And then, oh, and also you were a speaker for my foundation presentation last year, which got I'll just do a little plug that got the highest ratings of the entire
Right.
breakout session. So congratulations on that too.
Yes. That was on workforce development. Got to be at the table for workforce development.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Patrick, and I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Zeb.
Bye.